Hello, LifeSite News. This is Louis Knuffke. We're in Washington, D.C., just across from the Capitol at the District Courthouse. We've received 2 sentences today for 2 of the D.C. 9 pro-lifers. And as we speak, the 3rd sentence is coming down. We're joined right now with the brother of one of the defendants, John Hinshaw. His brother, Rick, gave a very moving testimony about John's character today in the courtroom. So, welcome, Richard.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Louis.
Maybe if you could just tell all of the LifeSite viewers who were not there in the courtroom something of what you shared with the judge and the court about your brother, growing up with him and his pro-life work and the compassionate character that you testified to for all of us.
Well, yeah, right, Louis. What I wanted to do was get across that what he did in this case, attempting to protect unborn babies, was consistent with a lifetime of standing up for vulnerable people. And I started by talking about when he was in 3rd or 4th grade, and I'll never forget this. He befriended a boy in his class who probably today would be diagnosed as on the autism spectrum. He was a bright boy, but very emotional, very quick to outbursts, and as a result, he became a target of other students in the class. And John befriended him and even tried to intervene with the teacher when she would punish this boy for his outbursts, but not those who were constantly tormenting him. And I talked about how John, by doing that, naturally he invited abuse by these bullies himself by befriending this kid, but that it didn't matter to him. This was a boy who needed a friend and an advocate, and he found one in my brother at 8 or 9 years old. And that then going on throughout his life, John's profession was working for charitable nonprofit groups, and what he has done for years and is still doing today until he was imprisoned here is working with people struggling with mental illness. And again, he's had friends, relatives even warn him about, isn't that dangerous? Some mentally ill can be very violent, but he does not think of the consequences to himself. These are vulnerable, struggling people who need an advocate, who need a friend, and John is both. He's very skilled at helping these people access whatever services they need, but he's also a kind friend to them. And I told about how during the trial here in this courtroom last August, my daughter, she shared this in a letter to the judge. She was leaving the courthouse with him, and they encountered a homeless man on the street. And my brother not only reached into his pocket to find some money to give the man, but he stopped and he spent several minutes talking with him at a time, as we know, where there's so much random violence committed, unfortunately, by street people struggling with mental illness or substance addiction. But again, John saw a man who could use a kind word and a listening ear, and that's what John gave him. And I tried to suggest to the court that while obviously there are I worked for my district attorney's office for several years as a spokesman, I understand the need to have consequences for violating the law, even in a matter of conscience such as this. But I said it's also important that law enforcement discern when and how long and for how long incarceration better serves the common good than ending incarceration might serve the common good. And that the point is that with my brother, with all of the contributions he makes, with all of the people he cares for, not to mention his care and love for his family, that it's at the point now where he be released. The incarceration was too long to begin with for nonviolent civil disobedience, but with what I shared about his character, his kindness and care for all vulnerable people, that it was time to release him from incarceration and get him back to the people who need his loving care in their lives.
I want to say a little bit about your brother's very eloquent statement before the judge as well. On my part, 3 things kind of struck me, and I just like to get your thoughts as well. One was, in spite of the judge's insistence that the case was not about abortion, your brother went right for that issue. His what he did at the clinic and the reason he was on trial, the reason he was behind bars, was to prevent abortion. That was very, very clear. And so he made that point. He also drew on his experience as a father, which I thought was very beautiful, and his admiration for the dedication of his wife in taking care of their children. And then, very strikingly, he also, as it were, called out the judge and accepted his sentence, which he was about to hear from her, in expiation for the guilt with which she would pronounce it, and the guilt of our nation in destroying so many lives through abortion. I thought it was one of the most powerful testimonies to the sanctity of life and the obligations that places upon us who can defend the unborn. So what were your thoughts when he was speaking, and what are your thoughts now that the sentence has actually come down?
Okay, well, first, yeah, as he was speaking, the whole idea that this case was not about abortion, which the prosecution and the judge have been emphasizing from the start, it is just, it's clearly false. The fact is that, as one of the defense attorneys said right after conviction, we are sending these people to prison for doing exactly what we honor Martin Luther King every January for having done, nonviolently committing nonviolent civil disobedience to protest injustice. It is the fact that these protesters were doing it to protest abortion that led to them being incarcerated and charged with such extreme crimes, with such, long-term potential sentences. The FACE Act was passed, no matter how they doctor it up by saying, well, it's to protect, our access to health care. It was written precisely to allow draconian sentences at that time for the pro-life rescuers who were having so many successes in turning women away from abortion that the abortion industry demanded this legislation, and the Congress and the Clinton administration gave it to them. So it is precisely because of what these protesters were protesting, abortion, that they faced the draconian sentences that they did. And then secondly, in terms of the sentencing today for my brother, obviously, given what he could have faced, I'm pleased. I'm pleased for his family that he only has now, he was given 21 months. He's already served 9 months, so he has a year left, and his attorney believes that probably he'll get to serve the last part of that in home confinement. So obviously, given what could have happened, I'm pleased with that. But it's important to emphasize that doesn't in any way lessen the injustice of this entire episode. The 9 months he's already served are a grave injustice, and every day more that he has to serve is still a grave injustice. I'm gratified, and I think it's because of all the prayers that so many people have been offering over these last 9 months that somehow touched the hearts, or in some way, God touched the prosecutor and their recommendation and the judge in what she agreed to in terms of John's sentence. So that's what I think it's attributable to, the power of prayer that at least lessened the injustice, or the time of the injustice that he's going to have to serve.
And maybe one last question. This judge, Colleen Cotterly, she was a Bill Clinton appointment, as your brother pointed out in one of the articles that he wrote for LifeSiteNews. And under Bill Clinton, the FACE Act was also enacted. Your nephew pointed out just after the sentencing that this judge could have retired last year and decided to take this case during the pretrial, paperwork and everything. Do you think she has something in it? Do you think this is a case that she wants to make sure goes down in history, as it were, with her name on it.
I think that's, some of us were talking about that over lunch, and how she emphasized this morning how there was no precedent on this, that there is nothing like this case under this law that had been decided before. And I think that really tipped her hand, yes, that this is something where she wants her name on it. She's given her age. She's looking at this as her legacy, and that might even be why she did agree to lighter sentences than we were afraid. The way she handled herself at trial, we thought she was going to be a lot tougher. But she maybe has now what she wants, her legacy, and maybe she didn't want to overdo it in sentencing in a way that might jeopardize the case on appeal, and if it gets overturned on appeal, then there goes her legacy. I mean, I'm speculating on this, but I think as you raised the question and just that statement that she made this morning, I think she tipped her hand that she's looking at this in terms of her legacy, not in terms of justice.
Well, thank you, Rick, and we look forward to this case moving forward with all the appeals.
Well, thank you, and thank you to LifeSiteNews for all the coverage that you've been giving this case from the beginning. It certainly helped to bring pro-life public opinion to bear on this and to increase all the prayers for John and his co-defendants.
All right, LifeSiteNews, this is Louis Knuffke reporting from Washington, D.C. This is at the end of the first day of sentencing for the DC-9. And we're here with Monica Miller, who is a good friend of many of the defendants in this case. And after the third sentence has come down, we're here to get some of her comments. Thank you, Monica, for joining us.
Thank you.
Maybe if you could just tell us what some of your thoughts were during the sentencing today, and a little bit about the comments that the judge offered, because she had some pointed words for the defendants as she pronounced sentence.
Well, I have to say, I've sat through many trials having to do with pro-life rescues, the ones that I've done, the ones that my friends have done, and I would like people to understand that being involved in a pro-life trial, being placed on trial for rescuing unborn children from abortion is like, frankly, it's like entering a kind of insane asylum. There's an insanity involved. Well, what's the insanity? The denial of objective truth. And what the ultimate denial is, and why these people are suffering these sentences that were handed down today by Judge Colleen Kohler-Catoli, the unborn are invisible. The injustice that happens to the unborn in the House of Horrors, I think I can call it that, St. Angelo's Surgery Center here in D.C., where this particular rescue took place in 2020. He kills babies through the 9th month of pregnancy. Perfectly healthy babies. This is abortion on demand. And those babies remain invisible. So that the jury is never able to weigh the value of, okay, we're going to enter an abortion clinic, we're going to technically break the law, but for what purpose? The purpose is to defend life, to defend real human beings who are literally about to be exterminated, crushed. Their bodies are going to be severed, their limbs severed, and none of that violence, this is the thing, none of that violence is ever anything that the jury is allowed to take into consideration. They're not allowed to see. They could have actually seen some of St. Angelo's victims, because 115 of them were given to Lauren Handy and Teresa Bekovinik back in March of 2022 by the waste disposal driver. We have photographs, 5 of them aborted in late term. I've seen literally thousands of bodies of aborted babies from our taking them out of the trash beginning in 1987, and the most recent one was in 2018. But when I saw those photos, I cried new tears. And I actually wrote my letter to the judge telling her that. If the jury was allowed to see those bodies, if the jury was allowed to see the video from Live Action, the Live Action video where he says, occasionally the fetus is born alive. What do you do with it? Nothing. And so we know that this is going on in his abortion center. The jury was not allowed to see what Cotoli characterized as a propaganda piece, right? So without that truth, the pro-lifers today that were sentenced suffer the injustice with the unborn children. And this whole thing about Cotoli characterizing the rescue as having elements of violence. They rushed into the door. Supposedly, one of the staff members sprained her ankle because there was a little scuffle at the door, and so on. Okay, but what about the violence that's done to the unborn? That is of absolutely zero consequence. And unless that truth is brought forth in these trials, there will never be justice. So we just need to not allow it to cause us to despair or cause us to hold back from future rescues of unborn children, especially doing Red Rose rescues that so far has not been subject to the FACE law, okay? So that we need to continue our work.
Yeah, so it definitely seemed like, we heard again today the judge say that the case was not about abortion.
Over and over again. And
with
the prosecutors, the same mantra, this case is not about abortion. Well, that's because you've made sure that it's not about abortion.
And it seemed that John Hinshaw and Will Goodman, and maybe you could tell us about Lauren's testimony. The courtroom was too full for me to actually get in for that one, but it seemed like they made a point to draw attention precisely to abortion, which is why they went to this clinic.
It was amazing. I have to say, John Hinshaw's sentencing statement was magnificent. It almost brought me to tears. And he did not neglect to even mention the names, because the 5 babies, the late-term babies that are still at the medical examiner's office, have been named. And he threw that back at the judge. These babies that had no choice. Who's the real vulnerable persons here? And by the way, that's a very key word, vulnerable, because in the sentencing recommendation documents that were submitted to the judge, that language is used that these defendants, these co-conspirators, violated the rights of the vulnerable. Okay, the women scheduled to get abortions. It's so incredible the twisted use of language. Who's really the truly vulnerable are the unborn children who are about to be exterminated, absolutely helpless, trapped in their mother's wombs, and subject to horrific acts of violence. So the world is upside down.
Yeah, it seems like we do have several reversals, as it were, in the case. The mothers, as you mentioned, being called the victims instead of the children whom they're going to kill.
Yes.
And then when John Hinshaw spoke today, it actually seemed like he was calling out the judge for her aggressive pro-abortion stance, which was manifested in this case.
Calling out the judge regarding her responsibility in supporting the culture of death. And it was a very, very beautiful way that he put it, because he said, "Your Honor, I am sorry." Okay, now, okay, what, okay. So then let the next shoe drop, right? "Your Honor, I am sorry. I'm sorry that I haven't done enough to defend the unborn. And because I haven't done enough to defend the unborn, the culture is what it is. You are what you are. This court today is what it is because we haven't really stood up and defended the victims who are vulnerable." It was beautiful, beautiful elocution.
There was something that also struck me when Will Goodman was speaking toward the end of his statement. He recounted the gospel story of the visitation of Mary to her cousin Elizabeth. And it struck me that the feast day on which Dobbs was given for that year was, it was the Feast of the Sacred Heart, and that's a movable feast. So on the Catholic calendar, the feast day that sticks is actually the feast of the birth of John the Baptist, which is the reading, what he was recounting. And so it struck me that this was a beautiful story for him to bring up. And he said this is what he thinks of before he ever does a rescue.
His point was, when Mary goes to Elizabeth, after she finds out from the angel that Elizabeth, in her old age, right, is now pregnant with the only baby that she'll probably ever have, right, that Mary goes to Elizabeth to give her words of love and encouragement. And he says that's what we want to do to these moms who are pregnant and who may feel distress, they feel worry, they feel burdened, and they're tempted to do something wrong regarding. So that was just a beautiful way to introduce. That's what that is the love we wanted to show to the women in St. Angelo's abortion center.
Well, maybe you could say a little bit too about the treatment that these pro-lifers have been given. You're a friend of Heather Idoni, and it's been discovered that she was placed in solitary confinement last fall, and now she's suffered a stroke just 2 weeks ago and has been denied essential heart medication at the D.C. jail where she is currently, just a few blocks away in Southeast. Maybe you could tell us a little about your thoughts regarding all of that.
Well, the problem, of course, with the prison system is in many ways, it's not attentive to your needs. And Heather probably was, trying to be brave and not trying to exhibit, that I'm sick, I need help. And so if you're not making a lot of noise, drawing attention to yourself, that old adage, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? Okay. But still in all, the 22 days for sharing food and sharing material possessions with the other inmates was very harsh. 22 days in solitary for that. And they do have a rule about not doing that. Okay, whatever. And then she's been in and out of the hospital within the last week. Now I understand she's back at the jail and hopefully getting the medication that she needs, and she'll be stabilized.
And could you tell us maybe just a little bit too about the years of work that you've done with Heather, in sidewalk counseling and other rescues, before this trial took place?
Right. Heather and I teamed up to do sidewalk counseling at the Women's Center Abortion Center in Flint, Michigan. We're both from Michigan. She lives pretty close by to that particular abortion center. So we did sidewalk counseling. Actually, I have to say it was parking lot counseling, because at that time we literally this abortion center was in a strip mall. Okay, it's next to a dollar store, and so we were able to actually be on the parking lot. We could approach all the moms going in. So it was a really great opportunity to do sidewalk or parking lot counseling. Then Heather and I also did some sidewalk counseling, and kind of ironically with Caroline Davis, okay, who the pro-lifer that turned state's evidence and turned against her fellow pro-lifers in these cases. So we did sidewalk counseling at Planned Parenthood in Flint. Caroline Davis was with us, and then Heather and I, Matthew Connolly, Doc Cavalli, and another woman whose name escapes me. Her first name is Ann Norton. We did a rescue at the Heritage Abortion Center in Grand Rapids, Michigan. This would have been May of 2020. And Caroline Davis participated in that rescue with us. And she was on fire for the babies at that time. Well, we all go to court except for Caroline, who was handled separately, and actually she pled no contest because of her age. She had a kind of a separate hearing because she was under the age of 21 at that time. We were found not guilty. We all go to court. We had a not guilty verdict, so it was great. And then Heather's accompanied me to my hearings that we had for the rescue that Lauren Handy and I did at the Planned Parenthood in Bedford Heights, Ohio. Those charges have been dropped. We're not quite sure why, but it might have something to do with, frankly, the Department of Justice. We're waiting to see what's happening with them. But it was a Red Rose rescue, and it's going to be very difficult I think, and this is our attorney's opinion, for them to try to construe that Red Rose rescues fit under the FACE law when we don't block anything. No hallways are blocked, no people are blocked. We don't block anything in a Red Rose rescue. And so we've had 37 Red Rose rescues, and there's been no FACE charges.
And as I understand, she has 5 of her own children with her husband, and then they adopted 10 children from the Ukraine. Do you know their family well?
I've met her husband, of course, but I have not met her children. But hey, maybe the judge should take that into consideration.
Well, thank you so much, Monica, for all the work that you're doing in the pro-life movement. You're doing plenty yourself, and for your friendship with these defendants.
Let's pray for
here.
them.
Indeed. Hello, LifeSiteNews. This is Louis Knuffke. I'm reporting from Washington, D.C. We're at the district courthouse, and this morning we received 2 sentences for 2 more members of the DC-9, and we're joined today with a friend of one of the defendants, a friend of Jonathan Darnell, who was sentenced this morning to 34 months, 9 of which he has served already. Dana DeMattia joins us here. And Dana, what were your thoughts during sentencing and during Jonathan's brief, but I thought very poignant statement to the court and the judge before his sentence?
I mean, the sentencing is a lot less than we expected, which is great. It still is unjust. I think this trial, this case, as we know, it's unprecedented. No one's ever been criminally convicted and found guilty for violating FACE. I still think that it's not 11 years, but 3 to 5 years that our friends are facing is intense to get this passed.
And one thing that I learned this morning, which I was not aware of, was Jonathan's distinguished service abroad. We were told he was commended by the judge, who mentioned that he had received numerous medals and honors during 2 deployments to Iraq, and he had attained the rank of captain in the Army. So perhaps a little known mark of honor for one of these defendants. And he had some words about, based on his service to his country and relating that to the unborn. Any thoughts on that?
I thought it was really poignant. He said, as a member of the Army, I have a duty to uphold law, moral law, and as a Christian, I have the duty to love my neighbor, and I hope that I'm upholding both. I think what's ironic with all of the defendants here is that as they're getting charged and they're getting their sentences, the judge is getting letters of recommendation about their community service, how they've taken care of the poor, the sick, the mentally ill, the disabled. I mean, everyone has had some part in serving the country, serving the unseen, and they're treated like felons. And it's just a very ironic juxtaposition with that.
Yeah, so we heard again today the comments, this is not about abortion, and you're entitled to your views, but you can't protest in the way that you did. Any thoughts about these continual comments of the judge that she makes seemingly as if she's the prosecutor?
Correct. I think it's just, she keeps denying the history of our country. Civil disobedience has always been direct action. It's been crossing the lines. It's been saying no to unjust laws. We can't say that, we're a country of laws, not of men, when the men uphold the laws, but also we're not led to uphold unjust, immoral law. If there was a law tomorrow that was you can kill your toddler, I would hope that we'd be in the streets denying and defying that. It's a very ironic thing. And all of the judge's statements, when she speaks about how cold and calculating the defendants were, about how you denied compassion to a human being, if you took that out of context, that's exactly why our friends were there, because that's what's happening to the babies. I think what's very sad, and we're focusing a lot on what the defendants are saying, but there's not one component that's really being focused on about what the babies are going through. Those babies are still not being named. They're still not being identified as they were the ones that did not receive any compassion or love.
And if I'm correct, it seemed today that Jonathan, like John Hinshaw yesterday, used his moment before the court to not back down from his stance in defense of life. And I was happy to hear that he mentioned that he was proud of the actions of his co-defendants and proud of their witness to life.
And I do appreciate there's a lot of solidarity within all the defendants. They believe in what they did. That's why they all came together back in 2020. That's what really the pro-life movement needs to do, is that we can't really remain divided. And I'm hoping that this movement, this case, really wakes the rest of the movement up to say we have to kind of stand together against this.
All right, well, thank you, Dana. We're at the district courthouse in between sentencing for the case against the DC 9 pro-lifers who placed their bodies in the way to rescue unborn children being brought to a late-term abortion clinic in 2020 here in the Capitol. And we're joined today with a good friend of Heather Idoni, who is one of the defendants. Laura Geis has participated in several rescues herself, and for one of these, she herself was placed behind bars, like the defendants in the case here. And so we want to get a little bit of her experience behind bars and the pro-life ministry and the witness to both the gospel and the sanctity of life that she was able to impart to her fellow inmates. Laura, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Louis.
So maybe if you could just tell us what the rescue was that you were in prison for, and then your experience there behind bars with the other women.
Sure. So in April of 2022, I participated in a Red Rose rescue outside Detroit in Southfield, Michigan. And it was with Dr. Monica Miller, Father Fidelis Mashinsky, and Elizabeth Wege, and Matthew Connolly, and Jacob, and one more.
Father Fidelis is a big name because he's here in D.C. right now, currently in jail.
He's in jail for a Red Rose rescue from May of 2020.
Okay.
He was given a 100-day sentence after actually being incarcerated for a FACE violation. He was issued a bench warrant against him for not reporting back to D.C. And then he had to appear, once he was released from his FACE sentence this past February, he had to appear in court here to answer for the bench warrant on that. And then he had a hearing in March, and he was given a 100-day sentence.
Okay, so when you served time behind bars, you were able to administer a kind of pro-life apostolate there in the prison.
Very much so. So when you go to jail and you're like a 50-something-year-old woman who doesn't look like she belongs in jail, it's very common for all the women. They ask, "What are you in here for?" And I just explained very simply. I went to the Southfield, Michigan abortion clinic, which many of the inmates knew what abortion clinic that was. And I went inside to the waiting room and the hallway and offered roses, begging women to please don't have their abortions. And most of the women, I'd say 9 out of 10 women that heard that story would say, "Oh, I wish that you were there with roses when I had my abortion." And then unfolded many sharings by women in jail about the sorrow they had for their abortion and the regret, and they wish they never had their abortions.
And then you shared with us on LifeSite, which we just published at the end of last week, a Mother's Day note that you wrote to your fellow inmates last year while you were behind bars on Mother's Day for giving roses to mothers at this rescue. And you drew the irony that, for giving roses, you, a mother, were now behind bars, unable to receive roses on Mother's Day. Can you say a little about what inspired that?
Well, what you just said. I mean, I have figured out how to draw roses, and this one, maybe not all of them are ideally the best ones, but this is an example of, this is a leftover card I had from the jail I have at home, and I just felt like all these other women can't receive roses just like me, and most of them are moms. Many of the women in jail are there for things like some drug-related crimes, like a lot of theft, and some other women were in there for DUIs and stuff. And they're very heartbroken that they are stuck in jail for their misdeeds, but also all of them pining for their little ones. Some were moms of young kids and some, grown kids, but they all felt that kind of sadness of, look what I did. I put myself in jail and now I'm not with my kids. So it just hit me that while I was sad about missing Mother's Day, oh, look, I'm not alone in the sadness and solidarity. I thought, let me give them roses. So that's why I drew roses about 60 times on these cards. And this is the quote I felt I should share with them on the inside of the card. It was about motherhood by Cardinal Joseph Mitzensi of Hungary.
Yeah. Now, but before you read it, just a little background on him. What you're about to read is from his memoirs, if I understand correctly, and it's his reflection when he was yanked from his own mother when he was arrested by the communists. His mother had had come to help him as bishop, and so this was his own testimony to the love of his mother. And so if you could please read this for us, it's very beautiful.
It's slightly abbreviated so it could fit in the size I had. The most important person on earth is a mother. She has built something more magnificent than any cathedral, a dwelling for an immortal soul. The tiny perfection of her baby's body, the angels cannot share in God's creative miracle to bring saints to heaven. Only a human mother can. Mothers are closer to God, the Creator, than any other creature. God joins forces with mothers in performing this act of creation. What on God's good earth is more glorious than this, to be a mother? And I signed it, God Bless Your Mother's Day, 2023, Laura, Cell 7, and wrote by Cardinal Joseph Mitzensi. And as I presented it to each of the moms, they read it and they had tears in their eyes. Everyone was moved by these words. To me, it's a rebuilding of hope and the culture that wants to destroy motherhood. That these women who were in vulnerable places in jail were being shown a recognition of one of the greatest things that they could do in their life is to be a mother. And they knew it as soon as they read it.
Well, thank you so much, Laura, for bringing some consolation and healing, to the other inmates.
Yeah.
And the reward will be great in heaven.
Amen.
The next step in the case really is to file the notice of appeal, which we will do very promptly. It could be getting filed as I speak here. That'll be on behalf of Lauren Handy, but we'll also take up the appeal for several of the other defendants that actually had other attorneys during the trial and up till now. So things will get condensed a little bit, and we'll file the appeal. The appeal will cover not only the trial itself. We'll appeal erroneous rulings that were made during the trial, the exclusion of the video and things like that. And by the way, that's well, there are several videos that were involved, and it's kind of confusing to talk about them. But anyway, the judge wouldn't let us show any of them. So that'll be one of the appeals. There'll be one of the arguments of the appeal will have to do with the exclusion of videos and other things. The pamphlet that corroborated Lauren's view of things, and also some medical studies that corroborate her view of things. We'll be talking about that. We will certainly be talking about the improper considerations made during sentencing. If you study what's going on here, you can see that two of the defendants who chose to testify on their own behalf during the trial also got sentencing enhancements because of the fact that they then got convicted, which in the eyes of the DOJ means they must have committed perjury. That is outrageous, and we'll be appealing on that also, as well as other sentencing factors. So the next step is to appeal all aspects of the trial on behalf of Lauren and several of the other defendants. The path of the appeal will be through the appellate court that sits over this jurisdiction. And understand there's also an appeal that's going to be going on from a similar Tennessee case, and that appeal will be in a different appellate jurisdiction. Those two appellate courts are likely to come up with different rulings. And if they do, there's a conflict between the two circuits, and the U.S. Supreme Court may have to deal with it. You don't file motions with the appeal. You just file the appeal, but you include in your appeal the various things you have to talk about, and that might be what the question is directed to. So the appeal will include all questions that relate to this case, pretty much. With the appeal, there are several layers to that. The fundamental thing we're seeking to accomplish is to have the FACE Act itself thrown out, because with Dobbs, the federal government has lost the FACE Act has lost its federal underpinnings, its constitutional underpinnings. We would like to have the conspiracy statute not thrown out, but we need a decision that it cannot apply to FACE, because FACE has no constitutional underpinnings anymore. So those are two very fundamental things. Then, of course, we want to have the conviction itself thrown out because of the fact that the judge would not let Lauren establish or support the reasons for her beliefs about babies being born alive and left to die. And then the last layer on the appeal will be to correct aspects of the sentencing that are excessive here.